Did the English translators intentionally omit two words from Genesis 1:1? Well, in a recent interview titled Is Genesis 1:1 a Mistranslation, Alex O'Connor sat down with Magnify to discuss 7 translational issues within Genesis 1:1. And within this particular interview, one of the issues that they discussed was whether or not words were intentionally omitted. And in this video, we're going to explore what those two words were and were they intentionally omitted. And so I'm going to begin with a short clip from their interview, and we'll go ahead and dissect it from there. So let's dive right in.
There's also a few things that the English omits, including out of the, 7 words in Genesis 1:1 in Hebrew, 2 of them are not even translated into English.
Really? My next question is going to be, which ones?
What are they?
and what should they mean?
Now, while Alex's guest did do a great job of explaining the function of this particular word, you probably picked up on the laughter and what appeared to be a bit of sarcasm as well. But this is the word. It is the word et. It is made up of the Hebrew letters Aleph and Tav. And for those unfamiliar, Hebrew is read right to left. And what is interesting about this, and they did make this clear in the video, is that Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it is a unique word in that sense, which has contributed to a lot of discussion around this word. And again, while Alex's guest did do a great job of explaining the function of this word, here it is from a scholarly source. This is from Learning Biblical Hebrew. It is a textbook that is used by students learning Biblical Hebrew at university, at least one of the many that they can. I have this digitally. It is a great resource. But this is what it says concerning the word et. When a word is functioning as the direct object of the sentence, Hebrew will often mark that for you by means of the particle et or et. Now, it's the same exact word. You can just see the grammatical feature in the second one. And this is from Logos Bible Software. This is actually a graph that is a breakdown of the Hebrew word et. Logos offers a graph like this for every single word that you could do. It is a great tool to utilize for word study. But if we look at Genesis 1:1 in Hebrew, and I pulled this from Logos Bible Software where I did a word search on et, you can see these 2 highlighted words in yellow here are the word et appearing in the text. And I have the English translation underneath. But in Hebrew, this is what it says. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim va'et haaretz. And what this translates to in the English is in beginning, or my face is actually covering what's underneath. There's actually a couple ways that you can translate this first word of the Bible in Hebrew. I've done a video on that as well, breaking that down. But you have in beginning created God et the heavens or the skies and the earth or the land. And you would think this would be simple enough. With what we looked at as the function of et, it is marking the direct object of the sentence. However, the interview took a twist when Alex's guest brought up the mystics and rabbinical scholars, dating back 1,000 years in some instances, that say that this word et is an important ceremonial word, not just a procedural word. And without playing the full clip, I'll go ahead and give the thesis of what he was getting at here. He stated, an object exists as part of a universe of things that you are pulling it out from. So then every time you mention an object, you're stopping to remember the chaotic entirety of all the materials in the universe and that you're just calling out a little bit of it, and you're stopping to do that every time you use the direct object. And then he goes on to say that's something that has been lost in modern Hebrew speaking. Now, he is speaking strictly from the viewpoint of these mystics and rabbinical scholars. Those aren't his personal beliefs. He's just sharing their viewpoint. But what ends up happening, and the reason that I said this conversation was misleading, is because from here, the conversation immediately shifts to inspiration. And here's the clip.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so where is that used in Genesis 1:1?
So it would be in the beginning, God created et the heavens, and then et again, the earth. So both of those are objects, heaven and earth. And before those are referenced, there's that little interesting word there. And then I suppose the English translators just decided, English doesn't have this function, so we can just omit those 2 words because they're not necessary. Everybody knows when you're referencing a direct object in English, it's clear from the syntax. But that's a really interesting thing to do if you're claiming to be translating the inspired word of God. It's really fascinating to already in the first verse decide that there's information that's irrelevant.
Yeah, I wonder if there are many schools of thought which believe in, the Holy Spirit inspiring translators as much as they might inspire the evangelists who wrote the Gospels or whatever. So how should we be trying to incorporate this into English?
All right, so it's actually not that fascinating at all when you consider the rules of Hebrew grammar. And I truly do mean that as respectfully as possible. This is the continuation of that quote that we looked at earlier from Learning Biblical Hebrew. It's talking about the word et here. This Hebrew particle is itself left untranslated and is only used if the object is definite. In other words, the direct object must be a proper name, example Joseph, a noun with a definite article, example the flock, or something demarcated by a possessive pronoun, example my flock, so that the object is set apart from other objects. Then it goes on to talk about how if the direct object is unspecified, you have to rely on context to figure out which word is the direct object. But you'll see what I have highlighted in yellow, that one of the musts for a direct object in a sentence is a noun with a definite article. So if we go back and we look at Genesis 1:1 again, what do we see that comes right after et? In both instances, we have ha shemayim and ha aretz. And what you'll see here, these two green arrows are pointing to the Hebrew letter hey that I have written as a huge white letter. And this is important because in Hebrew, the definite article is attached directly to the word and is represented by a prefixed hey together with a particular set of vowels. So what you have here is the shamayim, the skies, and eretz being the land. They are prefixed with hey, and each has its own particular vowel. And while each of these vowel markers are different, they both indicate the direct article. This is something known as compensatory lengthening. In Hebrew, it's not important to this video, but essentially this vowel on the word eretz is lengthened because eretz begins with a consonant aleph. Now, all of these grammatical rules aside, if you are simply wondering what the direct object is within the sentence, it is simply the word or the words that receives the action of the verb of the sentence. And that is the function of the et. It is to let you know what those words receiving the action are. So in the case of Genesis 1:1, the verb of this verse is the word bara, translated in English is create, and then et comes before ha shamayim and before ha aretz. And so it is letting you know that the skies or the heavens and the land or the earth are the two words or the two things that are receiving the action of bara. And it also should come as no surprise at all as to why the English translators omitted the word et. And we didn't really need a source for this because it's common knowledge in English, but I like having sources for as much as I possibly can. And I got to give a shout out to the man, the myth, the legend, Matthew McConaughey. Now, he didn't say this. This was just taken from the Persian Online Learning at UT Austin. And since he is the face of the University of Texas, I had to include it. But this is what their Persian Online Learning says. English does not have a marker for the direct object. Instead, when an object does not take any prepositions, it is a direct object, as in he hit me. So here you have it. English does not have a direct object marker in the language. Therefore, it's been omitted from the English text. However, they did link this to the idea of inspiration. And so I want to address Alex's comment regarding translation and inspiration. Now, to do this, I pulled two great quotes from two great books. And these are books for people wanting to learn Greek. I have both of these digitally as well. But I believe while they are for Greek, the application of these quotes is true for Hebrew translations. It's really true for any translation across any language. But this is what Greek for Everyone says. Translators frequently acknowledge that all translators are traitors. And then Greek for Life states essentially the same thing. It states, translators are traitors. We are all traitors to the text as we cannot always get the meaning right. Now, I'm going to expand on these two quotes in just a few minutes, but I did want to first mention two schools of thought regarding inspiration and translation. And one of these schools of thought is the King James only movement. And this is the view that the King James Version is the only legitimate translation of the Bible, and that any other translation is heretical. Now, there are varying levels of thought behind the King James only movement, such as which version of the King James Bible do you use? Do you go all the way back to the 1611 version, or do you use one of the more modern translations? And I've even heard someone within this movement claim that we don't need the Hebrew or the Greek manuscripts of the biblical text because we have the King James Version, and that the King James Version is superior to the original text. Now, I'll let you decide your thoughts on that. Share them below if you want to. But because Alex's guest, Magnify, mentioned Jewish mystical thinking, I wanted to bring up some Christian-based mystical thinking surrounding the Aleph Tav as well. And there's actually an Aleph Tav translation. The actual title of the book is called The Complete Messianic Aleph Tav Scriptures, the Holy Grail of the Scriptures. Now, this translation is based on a mystical Christian view of what the Aleph Tav means. And the claim is that the Aleph Tav, or et, is secretly Jesus encoded into the Old Testament text. And it might sound like a very far-fetched idea, but this is where it gets pulled from. That when Jesus is speaking to John, as recorded in Revelation chapter 22, verse 13, Jesus tells him, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And the thought process is that Jesus would not have been speaking Greek. He would have been speaking Hebrew. And therefore, Jesus would have said, I am the Aleph and the Tav. And so from there, the thought shifts to this is Jesus telling John that he is the Aleph Tav, the word et, every instance that it appears in the Hebrew scriptures. Now, there's many issues with this view, but just to give you two of the big ones, this same particle et appears in other Semitic languages. And you can actually get this on Logos digitally. It is the Hebrew and Canaanite inscriptions. You can get this either as the Hebrew text, or you can get it as an English translation. But it shows where et occurs in non-biblical, or if you want to use the word pagan, those particular texts. And so you've got to ask yourself, does this mean that Jesus appears secretly encoded in those pagan texts as well? And again, you can make your own decision on that. There's also another issue with this. It's just simply doing a word search of et every time that it occurs throughout the Hebrew Bible. Now, this verse took less than 5 minutes to find on Logos, but the point that I want to make here is that, as one of my favorite late scholars stated, that mostly coherent is not coherent. And in Judges 2:11, you get this verse. I've got the Hebrew again with the Aleph Tav or the et marked in yellow. This is the English translation. It says, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals," or the Baals, as we say in English. Well, you can see I've got the Hebrew text up here, and literally what this is stating is you've got, this is the Hebrew word asah, but it is in the true past tense, and it's in the third masculine plural. So you've got, and they did, and then this word b'nai right here is the children, or often translated sons, but b'nai Yisrael et ha-ra. There's that hey again, but it's attached to the word ra, which is the same word that is used in Genesis when it's talking about the tree of good and ra, the tree of good and evil, or the tree of good and bad. And then it continues on right here. The next instance of et that you get is actually attached to the word ha-ba'alim, or this is in the English, the Baals, or the Baals. But you would really have to ask yourself, is Jesus secretly being encoded right here, right next to evil and Baals? In other words, the children of Israel doing et evil and serving et Baals. And just one quick note right here on this word ha-ba'alim, or Baal, is that this is an interesting word because it can either refer to a master, lord, owner, something of that sort in human terms, but Baal is also the name of a rivaling deity to Israelite culture. In fact, in the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, in the entry under Baal, it states that the name Baal is a common Semitic noun meaning lord or owner. Applied to a god, it occurs about 90 times in the Old Testament. It goes on to say, the name is used in Ugaritic religion as the proper name of a deity, and also in the Bible, the noun occurs as the name of a specific Canaanite god. And the context immediately following in verse 12 actually indicates that this is a reference to the gods of foreign nations. So that's something interesting to keep in mind here in terms of where this et occurs. It's really problematic for this mystical type thinking in Christianity. And ultimately, I think you're going to run into the same issue with this mystical kind of thinking in Judaism as well. The reason for going down this mystical rabbit hole is because Alex and his guests come back to the concept of inspiration, and here's the clip on that.
But then it really brings up the question of why, if you believe it's the inspired word of God, would you not try to copy that linguistic feature in the way that you speak yourself? Like, if you are claiming that your worldview is derived from the Bible, wouldn't you want to talk about things the way that the Bible, like, wait, who decided that that was irrelevant information? This isn't just a written language, this like proto-Semitic script. This is like some of the first time that language is ever being written down at all. So it's like there may have been some of these customs that were very meaningful to people using written language for the first time that have slowly lost relevance, or like slowly stopped being important after thousands of years of writing so many texts after texts.
Now, my question back to this would be, how are you going to copy that linguistic feature when the language that we speak doesn't have that linguistic feature? I think that's a really odd point to make. Now, to a second point, I think it's incredibly fair to ask the question that if you're claiming that your worldview is derived from the Bible, wouldn't you want to talk about the things the way that the Bible does? Well, absolutely. But what has ended up happening throughout this video is you actually see that you start up here with the biblical text, and then you get this mystical or rabbinical thinking that is actually reimposed back onto the text. And then from there, that mixture of original biblical text and mystical/rabbinical thinking get intertwined together to somehow be inspired, and then that gets passed on in the translation. And I would say, yes, I do want to talk about the things within the Bible the way that the Bible does. And that's exactly the issue that we have here with the et, is that these particular views that they've been discussing are not based on the text. they're based on rabbinical and mystical thinking, not what we can pull from the textual data. You're simply not going to find anywhere in the text where any of these mystical or these rabbinical views are going to be reflected in the textual data itself. They don't exist. These views are something that have simply been imposed on the text. And to come back to our 2 Greek books, and again, I know we're dealing with Hebrew, but these quotes are true regardless of what language that you're dealing with in terms of a translation. We quoted that translators frequently acknowledge that all translators are traitors, from Greek for everyone, but it continues on and it says this: while these seem like harsh words, they are true ones. There is simply no way to exactly replicate the original grammar, syntax, and meaning of the text in English. And then in Greek for Life, right after it talks about translators being traitors, it goes on to say, and humorously so, but that is why we all need to learn Greek. So if we were to apply that to our context here in Genesis 1:1, we could say, but that is why we all need to learn Hebrew. Now, is everybody going to learn Hebrew? Absolutely not. You don't have to. It will certainly enhance your studies, but it's not a necessity to do. And so when we're dealing with an English translation, we have to remember that English does not have a marker for the direct object. Therefore, there's no way to copy this linguistic feature from Hebrew into our English text. I mean, I suppose you could put a dot every time the et occurs, but you don't need to, because if all it's doing is marking the direct object, we already know how to do that in English just from growing up with the English language. It's only if you're going to take a mystical view on the text that you would need that for any reason. Therefore, when we talk about inspiration in this context, I think it's important to remember that if a person believes that the biblical text is inspired, you then get a translation from that inspired text. It doesn't mean that you believe that the translation itself is somehow inspired. That's not the point of the translation. The point of the translation is to communicate the meaning of the text in the native language of whomever is reading it. And furthermore, we've just been in Genesis 1:1 this whole time. If you're going to make this claim that the English translators are intentionally omitting this word for any other reason other than the English language does not have this grammatical feature, then we need to ask the question why they did this in all 11,134 occurrences of this word across 6,853 verses. And I think the only logical conclusion that we can come to is one that we've already stated. English doesn't have this feature. Therefore, there's no way to translate it. And to combine the quotes from the Hebrew textbook that we looked at earlier with the Persian online learning at UT Austin, this word is left untranslated because English does not have a direct object marker.
All right, everyone. I hope you found this video on the Aleph Tav beneficial, but I want to know your thoughts on the Aleph Tav, on translation, and on inspiration. So let me know in the comments below. And if you want a video exploring how Genesis 1:1 has possibly been mistranslated aside from the Aleph Tav, you can check this video out here where I explore that very issue. Thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next one.